Welcome to Thanksgiving edition SEC Football Live. That is Stephen Godfrey. I am Braden Gall. We are brought to you by ML Rose, 6 great locations all across Middle Tennessee in the Nashville greater area. And if you're in town, if you're a Tennessee fan, going to the Vandy game this weekend, happy Thanksgiving. Go to ML Rose on Saturday morning. Great drink specials on Saturdays and Sundays to get you ready for your college and pro football weekends. Stephen Godfrey, how are you, sir?
That's me. I'm good. This is my favorite holiday of the year. It is.
Me too.
I just wish it was. Look, I love college football. I love the holiday. You mash them together. It just feels like it goes so fast.
I know. This is it. We're done. This is the end of the season.
Yeah, that's right. We're gonna reward it. We're gonna. The press is gonna convene at a golf club somewhere. We're all gonna smoke cigarettes and do a paper ballot for our national champion for the year 1958.
You're alluding to how it used to go down. For Mississippi State, for Kentucky, and for, I think those are the only two that are officially eliminated from the postseason, although it could happen to a few others this weekend. But their season is over. Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl, and of course Kentucky in the Commonwealth Cup. Can I call it that? Or is that the Virginia Tech?
It's game? Not the. Yeah, I've made this error on several shows over the years. I know. We have two Commonwealths that are near us, and we just assume it's the Commonwealth Cup, and it's actually not. And nor is
the Commonwealth Collision,
but it's not the Bourbon Bowl either, which seems kind of silly to me.
That's what it's nicely done.
They don't have. I think the Bourbon Bowl is something else.
So I know that you and I have had some debates on the show over the year about just sort of the general quality of the SEC versus some others and the narratives that exist around college football out there. I want to have an academic conversation about the 12-team playoff because we ended the show last week with sort of like, look, here's some teams that are on the road. They're all favored. Plus the Vandy LSU game, which is a home favorite there with LSU, they're the only one that figured out a way to win. I basically asked
jerseys, my God.
I was like, who's going to lose? And we both kind of said side-eye, like, oh, Ole Miss this is a tricky game for Ole Miss here. And it turns out that was true. But also Alabama completely destroyed, and Texas A&M, what a fantastically Auburn game in that particular game, to have a huge lead, give it all back, and then fight back and win 4 overtimes. So we now have a very real possibility of a 3-loss team getting into the tournament, in particular from the SEC, but it could be from anywhere. But that's definitely a possibility. So I want the merits of that conversation to sort of be an academic one between you and I. And then we'll look at some of these massive games coming up on what is a great holiday weekend. Again, ML Rose, 6 locations all across Middle Tennessee. Craft beer from Nashville, from the area, and some from the region as well. If you like Asheville beer or Birmingham beer or Athens beer, they got that. But it's all very curated for your needs. They make sure they've got a really high threshold for they've actually got a thing called the Beer Council, where they have a bunch of experts come in and they test the beers and they pick which beers belong on their taps. They're sort of like the Sherpas of Nashville craft beer for folks out there, and they have amazing food and really great drink specials and a brunch menu on Saturdays and Sundays. So pre-gaming for SEC games and for NFL games on Sundays. Make sure you check out one of their 6 great locations if you live here. If you are visiting, make sure you check out ML Rose, craft beer and burger joint. Great place. I know you and I and the families have been at those locations for many years. Nashville staple, locally owned and operated. Go support good local business. All right, each one of these games I feel like is different, Stephen, from the losses last week, the upsets, the three upsets. Oklahoma completely destroying Alabama. You got Florida and Ole Miss playing a relatively even and tightly fought game. Jackson Dart making some mistakes and then looking like his dog died on the sidelines. Auburn, of course, and A&M doing just Auburn and A&M things. I want to start with Oklahoma and Alabama because I don't think you said, look, Brent Venables has been in these situations a lot. He knows how to scheme up these situations. I don't think it's a surprise that the defense played very well. They are a top 15, top 12 unit in the country, have been all season. Championship caliber defense, if you even want to go that far. The offense has been the major problem, but Jackson Arnold played the best game of his career. 257 yards rushing, which is the most an Alabama team has allowed in 3 seasons. I think it's how it happened that is more alarming, and it's that the offense for Oklahoma played so well against Alabama's defense. What does that tell you about Bama? What does that tell you about Oklahoma?
I'm not going to act like I had this one predicted or pegged. What I said, I think specifically on this show was someone going into the playoff, which may or may not still happen, will have some really interesting tape on what to do against Alabama's offense. That's what I said, because of Venables' bona fides, because of his time at Clemson, and look, the success they had directly against Alabama. I know it's a different coaching staff. He's really good in these moments. I had no foresight into the other side of the ball. In fact, I said it felt sort of impossible to overcome, that even if the defense kept them in the game, my assumption was kept them in the game would have been 17 to 29, something in that range. I just thought Oklahoma couldn't persist on offense, and they did. It wasn't necessarily dynamic. It didn't really have to be. I didn't see this. Look, I'm a big proponent of say what you don't know, and there's no predictive amount of data to this. I feel like we've said that a good bit this season. Okay.
Yeah.
When Alabama loses, like to go back to Vanderbilt, running and keeping them away or responding with longer drives is something that is irksome to them. And I would even really throw in the second half against Georgia as well. They don't, if there is an Achilles heel here, which I mean, clearly at that result, we have to acknowledge there's a systematic, there's like a thing in the Death Star, that they can blow up now, because that's pretty obvious. And
maybe his last name was Lawson. Maybe is what it was.
I mean, I think
they did lose their star middle linebacker like in the first quarter or whatever. So
yeah, but I also think that it was more than that. I think it's just systematic. This is like, to me, we've talked a lot about that job, the OC job at Oklahoma, being probably the most important hire for the SEC going into 25, provided there are no head coaching openings, which as of, when we record this, that still looks unlikely, not impossible. Man, to adjust on the fly and to get really reductive on offense and to be successful. Like, this was good O-line play too. Think about the Tennessee game. Think about
no. I was going to ask this. Like, their three losses are on the road to Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. All not elite teams, but pretty good teams. Yeah. And here's the through line, because I'm going to ask you about be prepared. I'm about to ask you about Ole Miss and Texas A&M. What's the through line that connects all the losses? Right, like that's what's interesting to me. 54 carries for 100. 54 carries for 166 yards, 2 touchdowns, but more importantly for Vanderbilt, almost 40. I think it was 45 minutes time of possession. Tennessee, 43 carries, 214 yards, 5 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns, rushing on the ground. Dylan Sampson was huge in the second half of that game. And then Oklahoma, 50 carries. So I'm not great at math, but that is 147 carries. For 400, 500, like 600 yards rushing in their 3 losses. Seems like a pretty obvious through line.
I mean, I'm not trying to say the same thing every week, but I've already kind of floated this theory that O-line play has been the feast or famine moment as we try and discern the wild swings in this season in terms of conference play. That an O-line success or failure story has really predicated these moments we couldn't see coming. I think you could say it roughly the same for Vanderbilt, Alabama, Ole Miss, Florida. If you want to transition real fast, that's the story. That's the story. I do now. Look, I'll take a lap if I feel like I deserve it. And what I saw against LSU from Florida was, I was joking about this on another show, like some friends of mine. It looked like if you go back and look at the LSU Florida tape going into Ole Miss, and then knowing that Ole Miss has struggled to keep Dart clean in the Kentucky game, and not so much with LSU, but at certain times when the offense sputtered or there were sort of bad individual quarters for Ole Miss down the stretch this season, it was O-line play and protecting Dart. Against LSU, Florida looked like an offensive line. It looked like a zone blocking scheme where like they got upfield so fast after the ball was snapped, as defensive linemen. These last 2 games, Florida's defensive line,
10 sacks in the last 2 games.
Like, I'm not overemphasizing this, world beater. This is the kind of, like, you really want to break your brain. It's like, man, you want to talk about what team's playing the best right now or what unit's playing the best right now? They disintegrated that offensive line for the second week in a row. They completely took Ole Miss out of their game plan. The reason why, like, it's weird this is where you should want to educate yourself as a fan. You're like, Jackson Doherty throws X amount of interceptions down the stretch. He throws the 2 interceptions in the game. There's no pocket. There's no route development. There's no way to get breaking. There's no way for routes to break. There's no way for some of those trees to develop. And that's what Ole Miss does by giving you counter, like jab, counter, uppercut with quick run to the line, quick slant, line up again. Now we don't know what's coming. We have the 3 or 4 seconds necessary to develop the shot play. That's
the fade. I was thinking fade. Yeah.
Well, no, it is. Anything after a lull or a defensive lapse in a playbook is going to be considered a shot play. And Lane, that's Lane's.
Yeah.
He builds the whole plane out of them, right? Like, and they could not get that.
Florida had 10 sacks in its first 6 SEC games this season. They had 5 against UCF, and so I'm not counting that. And they had a bunch against Samford. So, but in their previous 6, and if you want to include Miami, they only had 1 sack against Cam Ward. That's 11 total sacks against power competition this year, and they've got 10 in the last 2 weeks. So I think there's a Florida conversation here as well, which is this is a team that has gotten better. This is a team that's playing hard. This is a team that has a quarterback of the future, and it's a team that technically is bringing its coach back. So I'll take my lap. When I said they were going to pull some upsets late in the year, got both of those. And there's a good chance they're going to finish with 7 wins, which is what I said they were going to be in the preseason, 7-5.
I mean, they better win 7. They better finish 7 wins. Good Lord.
But the way the Florida State, the Chipper Jones, Danny Cannell sniping, Twitter's still good for something. Twitter is still good for something.
Wow. What a cursed sentence.
Chipper Jones is first of all, as a Mets fan, I hate Chipper Jones. Like, I just hate him. He named his kid after my stadium, which is the biggest troll move in the history of trolling.
And why did he do that, Braden?
Because he rakes at my stadium. Shut up. Because he owns the stadium. I don't know. What do you want to say?
And because your fans were not nice. They were not nice.
Well, have you ever seen his bedazzled WWE jeans? Like, he's a hill jack. Come on. But that being said,
he's a hill jack who could jack.
Yeah, from both sides of the plate, unfortunately.
This listening audience is going to side with me too. So.
I know.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is just the insults. The insults he threw at Cannell are great.
Like, how can you get fired up about this particular iteration of that game? I mean, it also Danny Cannell. Someone needs to throw the towel in, at least on the Florida State partisanship.
It's bad.
Like, guy, let's not draw attention to ourselves right now. It's not a good idea.
So I want to, but see, to Ole Miss, and my thought process since the Ole Miss loss was like, there's still and we're about to have the debate between like what is the best 3-loss team, because we can go back and forth on this. And I understand both arguments. I truly understand the Alabama argument, but I understand the Ole Miss argument as well. And that's like, this game to me is a normal college football game. This is a normal November late season game where the underdog is at home. They're getting better. They have a young quarterback who's taken over. There's some momentum. You're playing on the road in a very shout out to the Gators fans, by the way. That was a really good environment for a noon start for a quote unquote bad Gators team, where the fan base is kind of questionable in the future of the coach. I thought that was a really good crowd for Florida, so give them a lot of credit. That made it difficult for Ole Miss in a hostile environment, et cetera, et cetera. And they made some mistakes. They were in the game on the final 2 possessions, and they made some mistakes at the end. Florida made plays. That was a close game. If they don't make the playoff, it's not because of that game. If they don't make
Kentucky,
it's because of the Kentucky game, and that's the thing that's sticking with me is that
it's the 1 4th down throw by Vandegrift, and that's the whole season, right. And it happened in September or whatever.
Losing in overtime to LSU on the road, no shame. Losing to a hot team with a young quarterback on the road in the swamp, no shame. Win
the games you're supposed to.
And the Kentucky game is the one that will keep them out. That's my thought on this. I don't see any chance. Now, the Egg Bowl, crazy shit happens, but I don't see any chance for Mississippi State in this one.
I saw a tremendous chance for Mississippi State in one situation that can occur now, which is that game happened at 11 a.m. Central Time, the Ole Miss Florida game. I was texting with people connected to Ole Miss, but also just in the SEC, and there was still sort of in the joking phase of this conversation, no real traction yet. Do they A&M it? Do you have, all right, all these guys who came in as NIL one-offs or free agents, if you will, you're out. You're done. Do you phone it in? You don't care about the Egg Bowl.
But you're not out.
But
crazy.
That was at 12:15 15
Oh,
or 2 o'clock or whatever.
Right at the end of the game. Yeah. Like Indiana fan whose fan vibe arc on Saturday was volatile.
Yeah.
Very
So
volatile.
Ole Miss, but people around Ole Miss, they're like, I was getting assurances. No, it's not going to be like the Jimbo culture at A&M where they basically packed it in because it's like, hey, you pay me to do a job. It's not going to happen. Like we're sort of a transactional relationship here. So instead, what happens is throughout the course of the day, one more than another, 2 really unthinkable things occur, which is that A&M goes to Auburn. Vegas was sort of telling about it last week. I dismissed it outright. Peyton Thorne having like the game of his life.
21-0.
And then the unthinkable is what we already discussed, which was Alabama. And then at the end of the night, you're like, if you're a coach in any one of those situations, probably A&M more so because you could play your way into something. Like you're not alive, but you're not dead. It's the liminal space.
And that is how Lane Kiffin's body language portrayed itself on the dais at the press conference afterward.
Well, they were dead.
Jackson Dart on the sideline. I mean, I never really look at an SEC starting quarterback and feel bad for him. Like they live a certain lifestyle. But I was just like, dude, you gotta I know you're beating yourself up on this one, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
I mean, I think I don't want to reinforce coachisms or pablum or boilerplate talk because our industry needs something better than that. But this is a really good example, guys, of why you don't spend Florida week when you're Ole Miss talking about the SEC championship game scenarios. Guy.
Yeah. But I also don't think so. The other one, and this is a perfect transition into Elko. I don't believe that Ole Miss was distracted. Yeah. I don't want to take anything away from Florida's performance.
I definitely think they were not distracted. Is the wrong word. I think that they were in an assumption mode for sure. Definitely. Okay. I don't know how you go that against Florida, but here's why.
I think you could do that against Mississippi State, but okay. All right. Well, let me finish.
But hey, in the second quarter of that game, the announcers who had a meeting that week with Kiffin said, I would have been more worried about this Florida game had we played it the week after Georgia. They don't do a good job of flattening out the emotional curve there. Okay. And he didn't do it at USC either.
And when that's the magic of Saban is flattening out the human element. That's what that is.
Or smart.
But I think too much was made of the Elko commentary where you're having a conversation about a particular team, your arch rival at a press conference, and you just have a Freudian slip. It doesn't actually mean that they're focused on Texas. If you missed it, he was like, "Oh no, we're completely focused on the game at hand. We're completely focused on Texas. Auburn," which is I think hilariously awesome, but not meaningful in any real actual way. So
anyone who's ever had to speak publicly while simultaneously in your head preparing the next statement or responding to something which we do all the time, it just happens.
Doing it right now. So I think what's interesting so Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee all win. Georgia and Tennessee against lower level competition. Texas handles its business against Kentucky, mostly takes care of its job there. All 3 of them win easily. I think it's pretty safe to say, unless Tennessee loses to Vanderbilt or Georgia loses to Georgia Tech, which is totally possible. Both teams have had moments of where the other team could beat them, and Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt have both had moments this season where those are decent football teams. They could absolutely lose those games. But if they both win at 10-2, I think they've locked themselves into playoff spots. I think Texas, they're actually locked into a playoff spot no matter what happens. I know that their resume isn't loaded with great wins, but
maybe.
But I think they're in. Even at 10-2 with a loss to A&M, I think they're in.
What about the loss to Georgia?
If they lose, they can't lose twice. So,
if they lose to A&M, they're out. Is that right?
They're out of the SEC championship game.
Yes. Yes, they are locked. Yeah.
So I think these 3 are locked in. And again, the SEC is not going to get 2 teams in. They're going to definitely get 3. And frankly, I think they deserve it. So we can get to the Auburn game if you want.
Texas for sure.
I think Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee.
Georgia for sure.
If Georgia beats Tech and Tennessee beats Vandy, which are not foregone conclusions.
But what if Georgia wins, or what if Georgia loses in Atlanta? To play the Kiffin theory out.
I would say this about the Big Ten and the SEC, no matter what. If you have to play an extra game against the top 10 team, you should not be punished. Full stop. Unless you have a terrible resume, which Georgia does not, and you lose really, really bad. I think most runners-up in the 2 biggest conferences you should not hurt them for having to play an extra game. I really don't think you should hurt a team in the Big 12 or the ACC. I think Miami, if they lose in the ACC title game, should get in. So I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth
Miami,
here. I'm agreeing.
I agree with you, but Miami's such a special case because they're so volatile.
Well, it's because their head coach is a special case.
Yeah.
But again, like Miami has a nice road non-conference win where they destroy a team like Florida.
Yeah.
Like if they beat Syracuse on the road this weekend and they play as a one-loss team against SMU and they lose a close game, I don't know why they would be knocked out, which is where we are in the playoff right now. Like we have to have 12 teams that have to play in this tournament. So let's wrap up with Auburn and A&M first.
I mean,
anything to say? Is this just Auburn doing crazy Auburn shit? Is there anything actually here that means any growth or progress by Hugh Freeze, or is this just the moment, the Plains, weird Auburn stuff?
I'm really tempted to just not dismiss it outright. They won the game, and I also thought they were very resilient in the overtime center.
Yeah.
I watched all that live.
I was awake as well.
I think that some of the play calling was pretty good in the overtime frames.
Poor A&M kid just dropping a 2-point like that.
I mean,
brutal,
and then it swings the other way. A&M's ability to come back on the road. This is shades of the way I talked about the Georgia-Alabama incident, obviously with much lower stakes. I do think there are consistency issues and some depth to address. But again, remember, we're talking about a year one program in Texas A&M. There were stretches that were similar to how they fell in Columbia against South Carolina, where they just sort of disappear. I do think, look, you and I got really excited about Colin Klein and that offense. A lot of things to take back in the offseason and say, not remove, I'm saying to sort of go back in the offseason and kind of stress test what was successful and what wasn't. So I definitely think they're yet to have the discernible sort of strong identity on offense. And then I think after that, this is very much a new program, still punching far above its weight, exceeding expectation, however you want to frame it, and just kind of got ground out there. And also, by the way, easily swings and wins the game in overtime. How are we talking about that? This would have been a chest beating SEC thing if they'd have been like, hey, man, you fall on the road. It's a long season. You go to a hostile environment. You come back and you win in overtime. They're a pass drop away from that conversation. So I don't really knock A&M much at all in this scenario.
I don't either. I mean, the Vegas was kind of projecting this, to be honest. And it's a season year one, and you still can win your way into the SEC championship game against your arch rival. Everything's there for A&M. So I tend to agree. What's fascinating about Auburn is their strengths are stopping the run and running the football. What did we just talk about with Alabama? Mm-hmm. And so if Jarquez Hunter, the question is can Thorne and Hunter and the play calling and the offensive line and the defensive line, can they do what Oklahoma did in some form or fashion on the road in Tuscaloosa this weekend in the Iron Bowl? Because if that's the case, what's added to this game now, while it's a very small percentage chance that Alabama gets into the playoff or Ole Miss gets into the playoff as a 3-loss team, it's still a chance. Mm-hmm. And Auburn has to win to be bowl eligible. So there's a lot on this line, like more than just knocking Alabama out, getting themselves to bowl eligibility, the extra practice time, etc. Mm-hmm. I know it doesn't mean as much to sort of the diehard fans, especially a diehard Auburn fan who has higher expectations, but it does feel like there is a recipe there for a much closer Iron Bowl than I expected.
He has not been. I'm going through Peyton Thorne's stats. Like it's very much aim small, miss small. Like he's only thrown 8 picks this year. I'm going through that. Like, yeah, I mean I'm looking at his splits right now. They've done a better job. The problem is they're just not in meaningful games and they're not showing out in a meaningful way where they would stand out for us to have a conversation. I think Freeze has got him down to a manageable level where you're not going to get you took the high and the low out. It's like in music, it's like a compression, it's like you don't have dynamic range with Peyton Thorne, but what you just set up in terms of Alabama, in terms of run advantage and susceptibility on Bama's side, I think this is the 3rd or 4th time I've said this in relation to some of these SEC games. Don't overthink it. This is what I said going into the Alabama LSU game. Don't overthink it. Like if you are strong in an area of discernible weakness right now, then just lean into what you do. And now,
let's not
grossly oversimplifying the Iron Bowl, by the way.
No, like, let's continue to oversimplify it, which is what is the biggest narrative and maybe the only reason that Hugh Freeze was hired back to the SEC and to Auburn specifically in the first place was this sort of fallacy about his ability to beat Nick Saban in Alabama. Sure, it happened a couple of times. However, 4th and 31 last year was needed by Jalen Milroe and Alabama to win the game over Hugh Freeze. And now you're telling me you could knock Alabama officially out of the playoff and give yourself bowl eligibility and do it in Tuscaloosa, and the point spread's down to 11. I'm not picking it necessarily, but I am fully prepared for a 4-quarter Iron Bowl. 4 quarters.
Yes, but Alabama in response is a different animal, even under a completely different staff, philosophically. Okay. So what do I mean by that? You go through and you look this year, 40-35, they lose at Vanderbilt. I think that the worst they were and the most scared Alabama fans were like the 2.5 quarters against South Carolina. It felt like that thing. Then you had a break and a bye, and they were this different football team, right? It was almost like South Carolina was a lot. Like they had this. They
lost in their first game though, coming out of that break, right? They lost to Tennessee.
Oh, that's right. No, sorry, I inverted. Sorry, Missouri was the one where I think they really turned the corner. Sorry, yeah, it was after okay. Tennessee.
All right, that makes sense.
They are fundamentally different after this stretch where they click in the Missouri game, and all of a sudden it's like world beater central. The reversion back on Oklahoma, my assumption is they have to be that second half team against Georgia. They have to be the team that comes out against Missouri. And I do think that they will have, this is where I lean in, and it's almost like a sports media cheat. And I just say Iron Bowl, because what it does is, yes, it allows for any explanation to be valid, any explanation to be on the table. But that's because go back 10, go back 15, go back 20 years.
Well, it's why we like this stuff.
Well, this one in particular, Braden, is we're doing the wrong thing right now, because what we're doing is we're applying
normal logic,
but also recency data. Like,
yeah, it doesn't matter.
I'm trying to pull out and say like, okay, hey, there's 2 seasons here. They come back. It does not matter because I think it's something like, how many times was the underdog closing against this in this rivalry, even at the height of Saban?
And it's why, like, I love this weekend so much. To your point, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. Rivalry week is my favorite part of college football, and not just in the SEC, but across the country. Everybody's in-state or intra sort of area or geographic location. It just makes for everybody's lives are interwoven. It's what makes it special. And you're right. There is no way to apply logic to the Egg Bowl, to the Iron Bowl, to Texas A&M, to, clean old-fashioned hate, to South Carolina. Clemson is going to be maybe the best football game of the entire weekend. Definitely. In the SEC. Outside of, I'm not going crazy here. I think A&M is going to be insane. But again, you got
to give that the edge for the off the field.
Of course. So you take some of the logic out of, that's why I think Ole Miss could be challenged and Mississippi State could play out of body. I just don't think it's that gap is too large. I don't think the gap is too large for Alabama Auburn. Let's go A&M Texas then, because I want to get to that game because it's the most important game. I think of the entire calendar year for any team in terms of, if you told me I could pick tickets and go sit in the stands for any football game of the entire year, it would have been Texas A&M. I went to 3 of these when I lived in Austin. When I was living there, I had 3 different. I went to 3 different games. It's you don't learn your mama so fat jokes when you're in middle school in Austin, Texas. You learn Aggies are so dumb, or Aggies are so stupid, or Aggie's so stupid, or how do you confuse an Aggie, or like those are the jokes you learn when you're like on the football field as like a 6th grader at Hill Country Middle School, like I was. And so it just means a lot. That's what I'm going to say. But on the field, I think Texas is the more unknown commodity here, which is fascinating going into this game as a team that's 10-1 in the SEC and in the top 3 of the rankings, assuming when they come out that's where they're at. I don't want to be reductive and go line of scrimmage like you're about to do, but I don't know what I think I know more about what A&M is than I do with Texas is going into this game.
How did we get this Texas experience in year 1? I thought if anything, they'd try and stack the deck. I mean, like if you're conspiratorial about this, I know they played Georgia and lost, but to go back and look at this as a body of work, it's very funny to me because I think Michigan is probably better now than they were in week 2.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's like, gosh, Honestly, I could probably say the same thing about I really could say the same thing about almost all of their opponents, with the exception of State because the roster fell apart. But like Colorado State, UTSA, ULM,
they
even
destroyed
Oklahoma.
Florida. They destroyed Florida.
Yeah, this
and
was
Oklahoma,
you play the games in front of you. You can't control what you can't control. I get all of that. But fortuitous doesn't do it justice, because when they got these teams, with the exception of losing to Georgia, actually, you know what? I'll remove Vanderbilt from that, because Vanderbilt, one, gave them fits, and two, that was a very close game. I think they caught prime Vanderbilt, if you will. Although I can't remember going in what
I think Vanderbilt has been
Pavia condition was in that game.
I think Vanderbilt, one of the few teams that has been the same from week 1 to week whatever. I think Vanderbilt came out of the box fully formed, actually.
Yes, full terrorist from day one.
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt was just Vanderbilt from week 1 to today, and so that you're right.
I would say for the most part you are correct. Yeah, because the tendencies and the we can talk about Vanderbilt, Tennessee in a second, but
you hear Brian Kelly basically call it the triple option in the post game.
He should be so lucky.
He goes, man, the run fits are tough, man. You're basically playing against a triple option, and I'm like,
you are
good,
but it's the triple option that can also effectively throw a 15-yard pass on third and medium, and that's where they live and die on third down. That's the easiest game, in my opinion, to prognosticate, is the Vandy Tennessee game. But
really,
in terms
we'll get there.
And if then, but this, not saying this team's going to win. I'm saying, if Vanderbilt wins, it's because of this.
Oh, gotcha.
That's the easiest one to flesh out. I think A&M Texas is really, really, really hard.
It's impossible. I'm having a tough time with it myself. They have played 11 games, both of them. We have as much data as we can possibly have going into a season finale, and I still don't know who wins which matchups. I think Texas' offensive line is good enough. The running game, the one thing Texas has done very well this year, not the one thing, they're obviously very good, but one of the things that I think they do better than almost everybody else is plug in a running back in a very dynamic, schematic rushing attack and just find ways to continue to churn out guys, because they've had to replace some guys in the backfield, and they're gonna line up against a good A&M front, and that is going to be strength on strength, and we shall see. I think
kind of like A&M there.
I don't mind it either. I think this is about Ewers and the environment, because I think there's a chance Ewers looks totally shook in this game. Maybe I'm wrong.
What if it's an ugly, close sort of 16-12, 17-14 type of thing?
Welcome to 2011 SEC football.
I mean, I'm just saying.
The last time they played, I think, actually.
Well, and their last game, I think, it's a walk-off field goal, but it's fairly low scoring. I think it was. It was a long time ago.
I hope fans in the conference that haven't watched this game take time to invest in this game.
I kind of liked how they closed on Kentucky.
Yeah.
It was just mash,
easy button.
Kentucky's a nuisance, but then it's all right, well, again, I always talk about being reductive when you are afforded the luxury. That's how I define the older, now older Georgia offenses. Texas had a spot of that on Saturday where it's okay, this nuisance is not going away in the manner and the speed in which we thought it would. So we're gonna lean. It's gonna be and close them out that way, which worked and it was fine. A&M, they're at home, and I have complained all year that we overvalue home. I will not say that about a game in which there's this magnitude, this history, this absence, all of the off-field narrative. But then also, when they have looked their shakiest, they have been. I mean, I kind of just want to say maybe tired on the road. They're just tired
South Carolina, yeah.
And South Carolina can be a hellscape.
Yeah,
and it's not it's not like Kyle Field can't be, but I do believe a little bit, and it's you manhandle. I think that's a psychological effect of beating LSU and then going on the road the following week against again very, very, very similar to even I know there was a bye week, what Ole Miss experienced coming off of Georgia going to Florida. And so consistency, this is the last person I want to prop up or talk more about in media at all is Nick Saban. But this is the spine of the philosophy, which is that's why he's screaming at people when they're up 56 against Mercer. It's because if you constantly flatten everything into the function, the micro function of a thing, you won't hopefully experience the wax and the wane. It will always be the same.
But what's interesting, I totally agree with the analysis of what made Saban Saban. But what I think is fascinating in this situation is every now and then you need 10 years of pent-up frustration to emotionally drive you.
Yeah, no,
I think this is one of those moments where you want the game, and I think it applies to Texas too. This is not an A&M thing. This is a both teams thing.
Sark would tell you. Sark being
this is different. This is different game.
I think, because I know a couple coaches involved, like when it gets like this, and I've seen those situations. I've been embedded for these situations, for Egg Bowls, for Army Navy, for the different rivalry games.
Gas station Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no kidding. When it's this fever pitch, I think it's a very, very dangerous third rail to seize upon that energy and bring it into the locker room. You won't need to. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
you won't need to.
I follow you.
Sark, the renaissance of Sark is following late stage Saban blueprint, and it is consistency. He knows that. Here's the other thing too. We got to be honest about. Like, Quinn could definitely get shook on the road, but it's not because Quinn is thinking about the historic rivalry with the Ags. This is a new day, and kids are very different.
I agree.
Like that in-state part of it. I mean, off my dome, I would say.
Although he was raised, I think he was raised a Texas fan in a Texas household, so I think he's different. But
the rosters are still predominantly Texas, but it's not quite that sort of ideological kind of we're pushing to represent thing that we used to have in college sports. Because you have kids from Florida playing at Oregon, it's just how it is now.
I mean, you have Texas kids who grew up in Texas households playing for A&M and vice versa.
I think Elko is going to have to do a really good job of not drowning, and I think he will do a good job, by the way, of not drowning the kids in that. I think it's more on Elko. A&M cared a hell of a lot more. Texas is Texas. It wants to operate like its own entity.
So there's a bunch of games I want to ask you about here, that I find genuinely interesting that aren't going to get any coverage. Arkansas, Missouri is interesting. LSU, Oklahoma is interesting. There's a lot of different narratives off-season wise on the line in some of these games. Tennessee is obviously interesting for a playoff spot, and just again, you could also make the case this is the most important Tennessee Vanderbilt game ever.
It is
because this is the best season Vanderbilt's maybe ever had from like a production and quality standpoint.
And the other team might be going to the playoffs. So
the other team's going to the playoff, and in front of 10,000 people, where tickets are like more expensive than games at Neyland Stadium because there's only like 10,000 seats in the building. By the way, all great games to go pregame at ML Rose. If you want to watch the Tennessee Vanderbilt game and cannot get a $300 ticket to a 10,000 seat stadium in Nashville, go to an ML Rose location, one of six. 300. That's one of six locations in the Nashville area, and you can watch the Vandy Tennessee game with craft beer and burgers and drink specials all morning. All right, I want to ask three loss question here, because as I do my rankings, I was doing radio with your favorite SEC homer on Sunday morning on ESPN. I was working with Peter Burns.
Oh man!
And
how's the Russian Ministry of Information going?
And he completely you have such an overinflated view of the marching orders that the propagandists get,
according to the propagandists.
That's just outward. I'm just telling you.
No. Let me be clear. Peter generates that. That's not like from upon high. That's Peter trying to be like, look what I'm doing there, boss.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm holding you up there, boss. But he believes it.
But we spent the entire show saying, no, I think that's what I'm saying. It's the other way around. We spent the entire show talking about how Alabama, Ole Miss, and A&M are all eliminated from the playoff. And I had to be the one that went, because that was his theory. And I said, look, you might be right, and I wouldn't disagree with you in a normal year. But I've said this for weeks and weeks and weeks on this show, on my national show I do with Steven for Athlon Sports, on every show we do. And that is, there's a lot of losing left to do, and we are going to have 5 or 6 two-loss teams minimum in this tournament. There's just not enough teams, and this is the case every year. It's not like a new thing. There's not many undefeated and one-loss champions. There's like 3 or 4, and then that's it. And then you have to find out who's best after that. And right now, Clemson and South Carolina might be the game if you were trying to say who's going to be 12 or 13 in the rankings. It's either Alabama, Ole Miss, maybe it's Arizona State, and I'm not talking about with the automatic bids here. I'm talking about like actual rankings. Is it Iowa State? Is it Tulane? Does Army still belong in the top 20? I don't know. I mean, honestly, it's hard to get to teams to fill out 12 through 18 without having Alabama and Ole Miss pretty high in those lists objectively. And so my question is I understand the anti-3 loss argument on its face. I understand the anti-SEC sentiment on its face. When you start to get to these types of rankings with these types of teams and resumes and strengths and weaknesses and what they've accomplished, it is hard to look at Alabama and Ole Miss and not be like, yeah, I think you're just as good as South Carolina, who Alabama beat.
What's
you know
South
what I mean?
Carolina's record?
They're 8-3 right now.
Okay. 20 hours ago, Peter Burns on Twitter. If the selection committee looks truly at every game and injury factor, then South Carolina absolutely deserves a real look if they beat Clemson.
So I don't think that's fake though, because if they beat Clemson,
well, no, my point is like they're still shilling for 3 loss teams, but I don't want to make this dumb.
That's where the paycheck comes from. So
that's what but you just made fun of me for saying that. That's what they do.
I hear you. Let's move on from that. I'm just
saying the biggest thing that they have to accept now in terms of the committee is someone, because of it's a volume issue now.
Is the committee here? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah, like in terms of the committee, it's a volume issue. And there is pressure. This is not conspiratorial. This is fairly well reported. You asked about Army earlier. No, is the short answer.
I mean, number 19 gets blown out. You're not going to move up, you know?
No, I think Tulane is actually the more interesting conversation to have.
Very much.
It's Boise as a 4 or a 12, depending on how they finish out, because they still have to play.
They play Oregon State this weekend, and then they play
either UNLV or Colorado State.
No, Colorado State lost.
Technically,
Colorado State lost to Fresno. Yeah, they lost to Fresno.
I know they lost to Fresno, but I don't think they're totally eliminated because of like
UNLV wins out. They win this weekend. They go to the
yes, they have to win out. Yes.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is, that's one question to have here.
Boise could be the 11, and like Bama or Ole Miss or Clemson or Tulane could be the 12.
As an at-large? Or you just mean in the raw rankings? Yes. But that won't matter because of the conference seeding system. The biggest thing that you're going to have to look at there is basically you got to pay attention to a lot of stuff, which isn't the worst thing. I want people.
That's great. Arizona, you got to watch the Territorial Cup now if you're an SEC fan. It's great.
Maybe not that one because Arizona's pretty bad. But yeah, you have to weigh Boise over the eventual Big 12 champion in the positioning.
Arizona State could work its way up, I think, in theory.
Hell yeah, dude.
Could work its way
to the Big 12 championship.
Could work its way ahead of Boise. It could.
It would. Yeah, it would depend on. It would get tight. It's definitely possible. It would get tight. I don't want to bog us down in the incremental math on that. What I think a listener viewer should discern from us is this: the way they're going to get out of the logjam with the 3 loss teams is that they are going. Someone's going, and they're probably going to put value of win over magnitude of loss. And if so, let me. Is
that correct? Because
I don't know what's correct. I mean, honestly,
I think the theory is that if everybody's lost a couple times, then it's no longer about the one moment, right? It's no longer about the one mistake at Vanderbilt for Alabama or at Florida for Ole Miss. Now the Kentucky loss.
That's probably what they're going to say publicly. But so let's say you're Ole Miss. You would want, first off, you still need as many of your brethren to lose as possible. So you would want Auburn to win the Iron Bowl. You would want Clemson to win the whatever that game's called, Palmetto. Then you would also want Georgia to. We haven't talked about clean old fashioned hate, which I think is going to be probably its best version in a minute. That ain't
I hope so. Yeah,
that ain't saying much. That game has been brutal.
Yeah.
You would want Georgia to go in and smash Tech, and smash either Texas team.
You want Miami to lose to Syracuse, because that's the other thing. If Miami loses to Syracuse, the loser of the ACC title game is probably out, which then opens up another spot. So now you have 2 spots that are in the playoff.
Yeah, and I'm still kind of convinced that the loser of the ACC title might be out anyway, because resumes are those. Some of those resumes are getting wonkier and wonkier. So value of win for the 3-loss country that we're talking about right now, I think is going to be the order of the day. I think.
Well, Well, in your mind, let's say Alabama and Ole Miss both win fairly easily, two score games.
Winning out or
no, they both win these games. They beat their rivals, Iron Bowl, Egg Bowl, and Ole Miss and Alabama are both 3-loss teams.
And they're about the same.
South Carolina has to be below both of them. So even if South Carolina wins, let's just say they're all 9-3, but they're in order. Take merit, take eye test, take resume, take metrics, take strength of schedule, take wins and losses. Stephen Godfrey. Who's the better football team in your opinion?
Oh, I have no idea. This was so much easier to answer before that
Oklahoma
thing, dude.
Work through
Oklahoma thing. I think it's at this point it's silly to try, and I think what's going to happen is it's going to be too conditional on what week is it, and they're going to have to look at some sort of merit-based thing. Honestly, they're going to look at Alabama and say, okay, where's your best win? That's what they're going to do. I'm just going to tell you, they're going to look at Alabama and say,
both of their best wins are Georgia. The Alabama's got the road win against LSU where they destroyed them. Difference is this is what's interesting about the debate, though. The difference is Ole Miss has the worst loss. That's the difference between Alabama and Ole Miss.
I know, but I'm just telling you, historically, they don't. I weigh losses more because it's a consistency thing, which to me bleeds over into more of like a resume conversation in terms of like what brand have you consistently put out there? Brand just being sort of what's your week to week efficiency.
I think you're right in an undefeated or one-loss situation. Once you get to 2 versus 3 losses, you've removed the one-loss anomaly, right? The consistency thing is you kind of just are what you are. You're not elite, but you're like pretty good.
By the way, I also think there's a world in which 3-loss Ole Miss and 3-loss Alabama both make it.
That's what I'm saying. So here's the thing.
World would have been very different if Minnesota held on.
Yeah.
And I know I like to.
We're all rooting for PJ Fleck.
I drag the stick across the cage on the SEC every chance I get. I think it has a huge media problem and all those things I've stated.
Penn State.
Damn, does Penn State look this year?
Penn State. I think Indiana.
That.
I think Indiana's better than Penn State. I think they are. But
you want to look at a schedule and be like, how? Look at that
one. But ultimately that's just another bullet point that backs up what we're talking about here. Because you can look at SMU, Miami, Indiana. You can look at Penn State and Notre Dame and Texas and say those aren't really elite resumes. If that's the thing that you're looking at. Like, I'm not saying they're not good teams. You can look at all those teams and be like, those aren't, like, that's not Georgia's schedule.
I think Notre Dame's home. I think Notre Dame's home.
No, I agree. Even if they lose, I think they're in. But what I'm saying is
probably
what I'm saying is those strength of schedules and the marquee W's that none of them really have a bunch of them. None of them do. And so the point is this is where we're at with 3-loss teams. If you're going to have a bunch of 1 and 2 loss teams that don't have great resumes, this is why SMU belongs. Even this is why Alabama and Ole Miss as 3-loss teams belong. This is why Clemson. I don't think Clemson is all the way out of this yet.
No, they're not. If the Aggies win out, Notre Dame may be the highest at-large seed. Just FYI.
Like a 5 seed? Yeah. I think
it may not slot that way because of the whole Champions League.
They'll get a home. Notre Dame's getting a home game. Yeah. But I just think
that was going to happen.
What the playoff did to us, and I think maybe it's just me then, and I'll just kind of speak through my own conversation here. What I have evolved in thinking over the last 20 years is, I grew up watching college football thinking that the 0 was the thing that mattered, the 0 in the loss column, that it was the special thing that mattered the most, that determined who you were.
It did, yeah.
And while that was true for most of my childhood in the 90s,
yes.
it has begun to change in both the BCS and in the playoff era now, in the expanded era. And what happens is that we learn that the 1 isn't automatically worse than the 0. I know you're on your, No,
I'm fine with that. Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. Mine is more about policy issues with brands.
Sure.
Dude, I've had my kid for some reason is like a diehard Army fan, and I've had to explain to him what resumes.
For some reason, what are you talking about?
Mean.
You've been filling his head with propaganda about the troops and Jeff Monken for decades. What are you talking about?
But I have one kid who's a diehard Texas fan right now. I'm telling you, dude, like kids,
that's weird.
When you don't lock them in the way you and I don't lock our kids in by like alma mater or something like that. Dude, my kids will come in. My kids will come in. Are you raising your kids to be ballers?
Oh, my daughters are indoctrinated. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They're Tennessee fans for sure.
Oh, yeah. No, mine. Our house is like Last year I had a freaking Florida fan. I could not explain that.
What is hilarious to me is this is actually totally on brand for you. What I think is hilarious is you have two, I'm assuming it's the sons, right, that are into this stuff.
Yeah. The daughter,
one is
she's figuring it out still. She likes Vanderbilt.
One's a corporate shill who likes Texas, and the other one is a triple option mid-major junkie who loves Army. I think that's fantastic.
But the highly social wants to fit in one is Army G5, and then the one who's like anti everything with the like long hair and is like kind of the petulant one. Some of it's Bijan Robinson related, but now he's like he has Texas gear now, and I'm like, what the hell?
I mean, so you're indoctrinating him into the NFL.
There's no choice in our family.
Okay, all right, good.
There's
good.
No.
My girls are Packers fans. They are Packers fans.
No. I hold my daughter upside down. I said, what do we never do? We never cheer for the Saints. Like that's yeah.
Oh, if you my daughters know the Bears still suck songs. They can sing the Bears.
Yeah, like you don't. Yeah. Look, you and I work in the media, but we're not dead. We're not dead inside. Like you gotta do something.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Jeff Hafley fan.
Like you gotta find something to be irrational about.
So the point is that 3-loss team conversation, while it was way too premature 3 or 4 weeks ago, it is no longer premature.
Well,
but it's also. It's no longer
is it possible to not do it?
Yes, I think it is. It's no longer an SEC homer thing, though. I don't want people. That's my issue with this. Is that if I say that, and if Stephen Godfrey says, "Look, I think a 3-loss team is probably the best option here," and it happens to be Alabama or Ole Miss, I don't think you're some shill who has got some agenda. I think it's just where we are in this particular season. So
the pushback that I'm not going to. The following is not my opinion. The pushback that I will get when I do shows like Kings of the North, which is obviously like a Big Ten show. Yes, old Doug. What Doug would say is, well, then why aren't people talking about Illinois? And you go in and I'm like, well,
because they're not as good.
I'm like, you beat Nebraska, you beat Kansas, like, and Illinois is a hard one to do this with.
Why wouldn't it be Clemson though? Like Clemson is the one that I think has the most. And here's the other one that you keep an eye on. And I know this is an SEC show, but Iowa State, if they miss out on the Big 12 championship game, but they beat Kansas State and they finish 10-2, I know their resume is not great, but like Iowa State's a 10-2 team that belongs in this conversation.
Yeah, the problem there is that's an 18-team league and yet their best win is going to be against a Big Ten team. And so the problem there is that they've got to work, they've got to get together. Hey, you know what? You want to get really off topic for a second, but it's relevant to this point. The Big 12 does a fantastic job for basketball. Like they've engineered a really good model to like stuff the ballot box in March with the Big 12. You like take some time if you want to and look at Iowa State. The problem there is like what I just said is their best win is a 1-point win over Iowa. They are not creating the best football scenarios possible. I guess in their defense, they just I call them the Vegas buffet
because they have to score with 30 seconds to go to win games every week.
Well, but it's like it's 2 a.m. and you're like, all right, I want some Utah and some Central Florida. Give me a little Houston. It's like what the hell is this?
I want some Baylor and some West Virginia.
Right. It's so glommed on. I don't know if they've figured out a way to do that. They would really benefit from divisions. But
now let me ask you a different 3-loss question then. Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. Could you make the case that South Carolina would be the most intriguing team in the playoffs in terms of performance?
Dude, I'm not even joking, and I'm not trolling when I say that. I wouldn't want to see Florida right now.
Heard, but stick with the question. I think that defensive line
intriguing meaning like you don't like watch out for these guys in the first round.
In a year, and where you and I have talked about this, in a world where offensive linemen fail to block most of the time, the team with 5-star NFL pass rushers who's dominating lines of scrimmage all season long is an intriguing team to play against, or one you do not want to face. I'm not saying South Carolina belongs. I'm not suggesting that. And honestly, I think Shane Beamer might be coach of the year in this league. They had the tougher. They had an extremely difficult schedule, and to overachieve the way they have, and if they beat Clemson in a rivalry game, to sort of
SEC coach of the year is in College Station.
SEC, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Not
SEC coach of the year is in College Station.
Okay, Clark Lee. No Clark Lee votes.
Talk to me after Tennessee.
Okay. Because I don't have any of those three, by the way, in the National Coach of the Year conversation. I've already voted. I've already voted for Kirk Cignetti in that conversation.
I don't think you. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can top or beat that conversation.
I did put Jeff Monken in my top three just for the case.
Thanks, I appreciate that on behalf of the troops.
Just for your son.
I think 5. I think 5 win streak right now is hiding some things.
So Alabama's the team you don't want to play? Who's the one you don't want to play?
Oh, of the 3?
Of the 3 in the playoff, who's the one you don't want to play? Or who's the one you do want to play?
Probably Alabama because it's quarterback play ultimately. Probably. But there's not one that I'm like instantly slamming my hand on the buzzer and saying, ding, it's that one.
So I finally got you to admit that Alabama's the better team of the 3 is what you're saying.
No, I don't really see no, not after Saturday. I'm sorry. I can't holy. Can we cuss on here?
Yeah, fuck.
Holy shit, was that embarrassing for them.
It's bad. So it's Ole Miss then.
If they don't face a pass rush. If they don't face it. They're flawed teams.
South Carolina.
They're flawed teams. They're flawed teams. We're talking about 3 lost teams. They're flawed.
Very flawed. Very, very flawed.
Very flawed. This is where the more you make me do this, the more I want to say, fuck them all.
Iowa State.
Iowa State, SMU, let's go.
I think SMU is getting in because you know what they're going to do? They're going to beat Miami and win an ACC championship before Miami ever does.
Oh, I could, by the way, just for the record, as much as I love to watch Miami, and I think on this show before I've said that they're the most entertaining product in college football, which does not mean good. It means that you're going to have a wide potential experience and it's going to be fun. It's a roller coaster. You might live through it and you might fall off the tracks and smash your head open.
Perish.
It is totally within the realm of possibility. Listen to me, that Miami goes to Syracuse on Thanksgiving Friday, I think, loses that game, and then shit goes sideways in the conference championship. And that's not a stretch at all. If you have watched Miami play tackle football, you want to talk about games people should have watched this weekend? Did you see the Wake Forest game?
Yeah. If you are an Ole Miss, South Carolina, or Alabama fan, you need Miami to lose to Syracuse.
Oh, you just need a bloodletting across the way. I mean,
of course.
Wait, who does SMU close with?
They got Cal in an ACC rivalry. ACC watching the ACC Network microphone, by the way, on the field after the Cal Stanford game was just really strange to me.
It is very odd.
Now it's going to be an SMU Cal ACC game, which is fascinating. All right, quickly here, Tennessee at Vanderbilt. You think it's easy to predict what happens? Like if Tennessee wins, it's because of defensive line stopping Pavia, Dylan Sampson.
Third down conversions. When Vanderbilt wins games, they are really, really good on third down, and it's because there's some run success, but not crazy in a stat box. Okay. I'll take Brian Kelly at his word and say, yes, get away from the idea of the triple being a run-based thing. It's that you are then schemed out of making a strong decision on third down. Does that make sense? They are basically throwing off play action with a high success rate on third down when they're winning these games. And that is possible against Tennessee. The flip side of this is I think Tennessee has to go power run. Yep,
I agree. Dylan Sampson.
Dylan
Sampson. I think the Oklahoma LSU game, which is LSU -6 at home, I think that game is utterly fascinating, as is the Arkansas-Missouri game, which is a 3.5-point spread at Missouri. I think there's a lot more off-season stuff about the LSU-Oklahoma game.
Yes.
I think we can kind of put a pin in that game and say, let's see what happens. But I think ultimately that we're going to have a lot more bigger picture stuff about those two. Congrats to Sam Pittman on a bowl game. I don't know what this game means for either of the two teams in particular. But I think it's going to be good stuff. Louisville, Kentucky. Any thoughts real quickly, and then we'll let you go.
Yeah, I would say that everything would lean towards a Kentucky upset, except for the fact the way they won this game last year. I think this has been actually this is not an I think. I know in coaching circles this has been a circle game for Brom and that staff. What they're trying to build their long term. This is going to be a kitchen sink thing. I don't love Tyler Shuff, but I do think that this is going to be high emotional investment. They're going to bring that emotion to the locker room in that game for sure.
I cannot remember a week in the last week of the regular season where almost every team had a winning record. It's a really good week in the SEC relative to the rivalry.
It's kind of an NFLification, and I don't mean that in a bad way. All right.
All right, Godfrey at 38 Godfrey, all the different places you can find him, and of course ML Rose. Enjoy Thanksgiving. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving. You and the family have a great Thanksgiving, and
You too,
we'll
sir.
we will talk to you guys next week. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for hanging out.